What am I talking about here? Let's start with something that kind of struck me about a few months ago. When it was in last fall. Anyone remember this report from October? It was called "What's the Alternative?" Nancy Snyderman, NBC News. They did this big report about integrative medicine at Memorial Sloan Kettering. One of the greatest cancer centers in the world. And Nancy Snyderman at one point said, while she was doing the rounds of promoting this, quite frankly, if a doctor doesn't know, she's talking about integrative medicine, I think it's time to ask for a referral to someone who does. Certainly in my world of cancer treatment, the really good cancer centers know the difference. And she went on to say, to complain about how insurance companies don't pay for a lot of this stuff. And how it's basically still not accepted, and it was kind of a disturbing story. And I also can't, before I move on, I also can't help but notice that in one of the shots there, something that would make Mark Crislip cringe, he's putting an acupuncture needle into a lymphodematous arm with no gloves on. Okay, for anyone who knows anything about breast cancer and lymphedema, which is a complication you can get after breast cancer surgery, you're prone to infection there. Not good. So, how did this come about? This didn't happen overnight. That this sort of stuff is in our halls of academia. So, I like to look at it as the evolution of quackery. This being a skeptics group, we've all seen this, but I prefer to look at the evolution of quackery more like this. And you could start out with folk medicine, hundreds of years ago, that's all we had. Quackery, whatever you want to call it. And then it became alternative medicine. Then it became complementary and alternative medicine. And now, it's integrative medicine. But again, how did this come about? I can joke about it all I like, show pictures of Homer, point out that actually Homer is the wrong person, it should be this. And when I learn how to Photoshop a little better, I will make that a little more convincing. So let's start with the quackery. Once upon a time, there was quackery, as I like to say. Long ago, back in the mists of time, before many of our current readers were even born, or far back in the memory of even some of our wizened elders, quackery was the preferred term used to refer to ineffective and potentially harmful medical practices that are not supported by evidence. Physicians having a grounding in science and prior plausibility, for the most part, understood that things like homeopathy, reflexology, energy healing, and stuff like that were based on pre-scientific vitalism, magical thinking, or science that was either incorrect, preliminary, or confused at best. More importantly, physicians back then were not afraid to call quackery quackery, quacks quacks, and charlatans charlatans. Not surprisingly, the quacks and the charlatans did not like this. This here is a paper from 30 years ago, and I almost feel like we should celebrate the anniversary. It's April 21st coming up. This appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine. You will never, ever see this today in any sort of medical journal. But it's called Engineers, Cranks, Physicians, and Magicians, and I love to pull this one quote from it. But anyway, note the date. But here's the quote. The most fundamental attack made by advocates of holistic medicine is on reason itself. Since science will not warrant holistic medicine, they imply that we should abandon science and the claims of reason. Holistic medicine is a pablum of common sense and nonsense offered by cranks and quacks and failed pedants who share an attachment to magic and an animosity toward reason. Nothing's changed within 30 years. If anything, it's worse. So it was quackery, but they didn't like that. So a few decades ago, most likely beginning in the 60s and 70s, supporters of quackery decided that they would never get anywhere selling their stuff, except to a small minority of people, if they continued to allow physicians to define what they were. So that, to define their quackery as quackery. So to change this, they joined with other physicians whose scientific rigor could be best described as questionable. Andrew Weil. And they decided they needed a new term, a more soothing term. So quackery somehow morphed into alternative medicine. And that is still the same thing. Treatments that don't fit in the current scientific paradigm were not supported by evidence, were ineffective and potentially harmful, and were used instead of effective therapies. Although practitioners of alternative medicine liked this term better than quackery, for obvious reasons, they were not happy still. And this is the problem. This might be an old joke among skeptics, but, or to impress new skeptics, but it has the advantage of being more or less true. Medicine, like the English language, as spoken by Americans, is rapacious about absorbing new and useful things. Unfortunately, it's also rapacious about absorbing new and not so useful things. So basically, the problem is alternative almost by definition means unproven. If it were proven, it would no longer be alternative, right? It's like, so what do you call alternative medicine that's been scientifically validated, right? Medicine, everybody knows that, right? That's why I said it's an old skeptic joke. So there was still a problem. Thus was born a new term, complementary and alternative medicine, which had the nice pithy abbreviation of CAM. CAM was and is medicine that does not fit into the current existing paradigm, including treatments that are not supported by evidence and are ineffective and or potentially harmful. But what's the difference? CAM therapies are used in addition to real medicine. So over a relatively brief period of time, this name change had its intended effect. No longer did many physicians automatically view modalities that were once considered quackery, later alternative, and now considered CAM, with as much suspicion as they used to do, and those who did were dismissed as closed-minded old fuddy-duddies, stubborn, dogmatic relics, who were trying to swim against the coming wave of wonderful CAM magic, and I choose that word intentionally. Modalities such as homeopathy, reiki, various, even reflexology were no longer reflexively dismissed. Sorry about that. Despite several of them being, violating laws of physics, such as homeopathy, they somehow found their way into academia. And, and one of the biggest concerns here was neutered. They're saying, we're not using this instead of medicine, we're using it in addition to medicine. So the stage was set for the widespread adoption of CAM by medical schools. And CAM practitioners thought that this was indeed very good, but still not good enough. So here we come to integrative medicine. And you look at the integrative medicine wheel, you'll see surgery, pharmaceutical drugs, herbal medicine, mind-body medicine, all on this lovely wheel with the Da Vinci picture in the middle. And the idea is this, that, right in here, alternative medicine and conventional Western medicine, there's like this area of integrative medicine. I hate this. This is a horrible thing because it implies that most of conventional Western medicine is no good, and it implies that way too much of alternative medicine has any validity whatsoever. In any case, CAM advocates, even though they had made huge inroads introducing what I like to call quackademic medicine into medical schools, were still not happy, and so the new term for CAM shows up, integrative medicine. And it's a perfect term. It's so media-friendly, so seemingly reasonable. And it's a wonder no one ever thought of it before. No longer were CAM practitioners content to have their favorite quackery be complementary to real medicine. After all, what does the word complementary suggest? Suggests the subsidiary position that medicine was the cake and their stuff was just the icing. It wasn't good enough. They craved respect. They wanted to be co-equals with physicians. No longer did they want their terms just to be complementary. Oh no. They want to integrate these treatments. They want them to be co-equal. They thus advertise it as the best of both worlds. I actually have a different idea for what the best of both worlds is, and the Star Trek geeks in the audience will recognize it immediately. You will be assimilated, yes. But what are we integrating? What exactly are we integrating? Okay, we're integrating science, science-based medicine, right? Plus what? Magic. Does anyone know who that is? Yes, okay. Well, for those of you in the audience who are not of my age or older, because Dr. Strange is kind of a character of the 60s and 70s for the most part, we could move it up. Or we can move it up even further to someone everybody knows. It is. It's magic. But in any case, thus was born quackademic medicine. It's a term that I really wish I had thought of. Oh, God, I wish I had thought of it. But I didn't. I use it, though. It's a term that, as far as I can best tell, is coined by a guy by the name of Dr. Robert Donnell, who blogs as Dr. RW, to describe the infiltration of pseudoscience and alternative medicine into traditional academia, traditional medical academia. And, examples are on the bottom there. Andrew Weil, the Godfather. Mehmet Oz, if you might forget, was he got his start as a quackademic before he turned to TV and became a media star. There's David Katz on the end. There's Dean Ornish. These guys are all, we're on the vanguard of this sort of thing. So we hear the term. How could this happen, though? You hear the term evidence-based medicine. Aren't we in the middle of the evidence-based medicine revolution? Aren't we supposed to be practicing evidence-based medicine? How could any of this fit with evidence-based medicine? So the question is, what is evidence-based medicine? What does it really mean? I like to point out that there were other BMs before EBM. For instance, there's dogma-based medicine. That's what the textbooks say, right? Antiquity-based medicine, which you'll hear a lot. It's been done this way for hundreds or thousands of years. Experience-based medicine, very dangerous. In my experience, 3 of the most dangerous words in medicine, because experience can deceive. Expert-based medicine, well, that's what the experts say. Habit-based medicine, that's the way I was taught. That's the way I've always done it. Surgeons would say that a lot. But it's okay, actually, in some points in surgery, because if you know a technical way to do an operation, and it works, that's fine. That's the way I've always done it. It's when it becomes a habit that you can't change based on evidence, then it becomes an issue. Testimonial-based medicine, right? That's the most common one. And we have lots of them, right? We have Jenny McCarthy. We have people touting various cancer therapies that don't work. That last one is a very sad case of a woman by the name of Kim Tinkham. Anyone know who she is? She was on Oprah, and she was convinced that she fell for The Secret, and she fell for a guy by the name of Robert O. Young, who believes that the cause of all disease is basically acid. She had a treatable breast cancer. She died. It took her a few years, but she died. And we could go back to, I left out magic and prayer-based medicine because remember, in the very beginnings, medicine was intertwined with religion. In ancient Egypt, priests were physicians, physicians were priests, the two were one. And almost all medicine was prayer-based because, they didn't understand the basis of disease and there wasn't very much they could do for it anyway. And then they believed that, the gods caused illness, so presumably praying to the gods could reverse illness, right? In the context of the time, it makes sense, right? We still have prayer-based medicine. You can see up on the left there, that's John Edward, who's been on the Dr. Oz's show multiple times. There's Caputo, the Long Island Medium over here. This is the secret lady. I forget her name. Huh? And this is a faith healer. A faith healer from Cleveland named Isam Neme, who was featured on the Dr. Oz show. Unfortunately, we have some of this stuff in academia, as we'll see. Now, let's go to the Cochrane Collaborative is supposed to be the Bible of evidence-based medicine, right? You've probably all heard of the Cochrane Collaborative, or if you haven't, you should. So he's basically say, evidence-based healthcare is the conscientious use of the current best evidence in making decisions about the care of individual patients or the delivery of health services. It's up to, current best evidence is up to date, comes from relevant, valid research, etc. And then evidence-based practice is an approach to decision-making in which the clinician uses the best evidence available in consultation with the patient. Who could argue with this, right? It sounds all really nice, really good. And they even have a nice little diagram like this where you kind of have the individual clinical experience, the best external evidence, patient values and expectations, and right in the middle, EBM. There's a problem, though, which I'll get to, it was a little door that allowed quackademic medicine to get its foothold. Now, the NIH, through an organization called the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, actually has definition of CAM. It's a little behind the times. It really should be the National Center for Integrative Medicine, but, government moves slowly. Whole medical systems, right? Homeopathy, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, mind-body medicine, whatever that means. The only one of these that actually seems to have that might occasionally be okay, be some good, like herbal remedies, nutrition. The problem is with nutrition is that what integrative medicine people define as good nutritional practice and what science says is good nutritional practice are often related only by coincidence. Manipulative, it's chiropractic and stuff like that, osteopathy. And, of course, energy medicine. I'll have more to say about that. Personally, I like Kim Atwood's definition better. A spectrum of implausible beliefs and claims about health and disease. These range from the untestable and absurd to the possible but not very intriguing. In all cases, the enthusiasm of advocates vastly exceeds the scientific promise. You'll also see that a lot of it is kind of rebranding of science-based medicine to be somehow alternative, integrative. I'll get into that a little more. But first I'll start with my favorite example because it is such a perfect example, because it is almost literally nothing. Homeopathy. I assume a lot of you know what homeopathy is, but I still feel like I have to go through it because occasionally there are people who don't know a lot about homeopathy. Founded in the late 1700s by Samuel Hahnemann. Its roots are in mysticism and alchemy, and he believed that disease is a matter of what he called the vital force. In other words, vitalism. I like to look at homeopathy this way. See, there's Dr. Strange again. He's trying to stabilize their vital signs through a series of homeopathic enchantment spells. There's a difference between Dr. Strange and homeopathy, though. Dr. Strange's magic worked. But at least it's a fictional world. What the heck? So, there's the law of similars. Basically, like cures like. Everybody's heard that. It's actually a very old idea. It goes back at least to Hippocrates, and then later by Paracelsus. Basically, the idea is a remedy, something that causes the symptoms in a healthy person, can reverse those symptoms in a sick person. This is a principle of sympathetic magic, really. If you go back there, Sir James George Frazer wrote a book called The Golden Bow in 1922, in which he describes the principles of sympathetic magic. And this is kind of a diagram from that book. We have homeopathic magic, the law of similarity, and contagious magic, the law of contact. Homeopathy actually embraces both of these. And he talks about how like produces like, the effect resembles its cause. etc. Of course, there's also this issue, the homeopathy versus Avogadro's number. Nice little series of dilutions here, tenfold dilutions. And, any talk you kind of have to go over this because in which you mention homeopathy. So Avogadro's number, 1 mole equals roughly 6 times 10 to the 23rd molecules. Typical homeopathic dilution, multiples of 1C. So that's 10 to the 2nd dilution. So 6C is 10 to the 12th. 12C is 10 to the 24th. Look, you're already above Avogadro's, or at least roughly in the ballpark of Avogadro's number. 30C is 10 to the 60th. 100C is 10 to the 200th. So once you get above 12C, you're basically working with nothing, or close to it. You might have a molecule left at 12C homeopathic dilution, assuming you started with a whole mole, which they almost never do. By way of comparison, the number of atoms in the known universe is estimated to be somewhere between 10 to the 78th and 10 to the 82nd. It can't work based just on physics. And then the other favorite one are provings. So how do you tell what remedy to use, huh? Homeopaths do provings where healthy people ingest the remedies and then write about their symptoms. And some of them are hilarious. I've come across these. Excessive trembling in the body when dallying with females. I would think that would be a good time, right? Excessive liability to become pregnant. I don't know how you measure that. And it's the basis for it's the basis for the Bible. So there were a couple of ones here that just crack me up, and I can't resist. It would take a long time. Okay, there was one done for homeopathic plutonium one time. So I kid you not.
Somebody actually drank that?
Well, whether it was plutonium, they said it was plutonium. So anyway. He describes this: a dream of a huge underground cavity where there was a double-headed bat with 3 wings. I was crossing a stream to revive the dead. There was no ferryman, so I waded across. There was a large dog with multiple heads. This is an amazing symptom. The place, of course, is Hades. The river is the Styx. The dog is Cerberus, guardian of the underworld, whose master is Pluto. It's just... And then they talk about how these Neolithic memories take us back to the original dark place, maybe 240,000 years ago, the time it takes plutonium to become inert, when one of our hairy ancestors took up a jawbone and smashed in the skull of his neighbor. Perhaps on that day the sins of the fathers began. So, what does Cochrane say about homeopathy? Let's see, a lot of this sort of thing. In view of the absence of evidence, it is not possible to comment on the use of homeopathy in treating dementia. Yes, it is. There is not enough evidence to reliably assess the possible role of homeopathy in asthma. As well as randomized trials, there is a need for observational data. No, there isn't. There is insufficient evidence to recommend the use of homeopathy as a method of induction of labor. Rigorous evaluations of individualized homeopathic therapies for induction of labor are needed. No, they're not. And here's probably my all-time favorite. Does anyone know what oscillocilium? Oh God, I always forget. Okay, yeah. Though promising, the data were not strong enough to make a general recommendation to use oscillococcinum for the first-line treatment of influenza and influenza-like syndromes. Further research is warranted, but the required sample sizes are large. This is what Mark Crislip likes to call osocilium, which is probably why. And it's basically a 30C dilution of ground-up duck's liver and heart.
That was 200C.
I'm pretty sure it's 30, but whatever. Does it really matter? And we can even get into some really ridiculous stuff. And this is from MD Anderson, okay? Yes, it is. It's from MD. Now, whenever you see ultra-diluted remedies in a scientific paper, they're talking homeopathy. Rachel Dunlop did a really good deconstruction of this paper, and I'm not going to talk about it much other than to say that they basically mistook toxicity from the alcohol diluent for, like, real effects on the cells. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And the International Journal of Oncology is actually not that bad of a journal. It's like mid-tier. It's not. So this stuff is there, right? It's depressing, very depressing. So what about Reiki? You all know what Reiki is, right? Reiki, they try and represent it as being very ancient and very, ancient Eastern mysticism. But it really was discovered in 1922 by Dr. Mikao Usui. Reiki means mysterious atmosphere. I'll give it that. They claim and practitioners claim to be able to channel energy from what they call the universal source. Direct that energy into the recipient for healing. It may or may not involve touching. It frequently involves hand motions and sometimes spoken words. But, it's basically faith healing, right? It's faith healing, using Eastern mysticism instead of Christianity. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to quote a little thing from that little bit of history on Dr. Usui, which described how he came about with the principles of Reiki. He, Dr. Usui, realized that he must find out how Jesus healed. This immediately set him on a journey of many years, studying first at Christian schools in the U.S. with no results. Someone suggested Buddhist writings, since Buddha also healed. This meant more years at the monasteries in the Orient. Nowhere could he find the answers. In Japan, he toured all the monasteries there, asking about how Jesus or the Buddha had healed. In one small monastery, he found some ancient Sanskrit writings. After a few more years of study, he felt that he had come to an understanding and that to go further required serious meditation. He went to a nearby mountain, declaring his intention to fast and meditate for 21 days, and that if he did not come back, they should come and get his body. When he came down from the mountain, he could heal. If that isn't like the same story as Jesus, I don't know what is. It's religion. So let's go to. I hate to beat on MD Anderson, but I feel like I can't help it because once I found this, I latched onto it. On the MD Anderson website, they differentiate Eastern and Western concepts of medicine, where Western energy is physics, and Eastern energy represents chi, prana, chakras, etc., where the prana is the organizing factors underlying the life process. And you have this gem of a quote, which you guys are busily reading. Modern physics has shown that light can exist as two interchangeable forms: a particle, form and structure, and a wave. The rest of nature can also be experienced in the form of a particle and a wave. For instance, water in the ocean is both particles, water, and movement of coastal currents, thermal layers, and tides. As in the ocean, the human body contains and is affected by energy that can be blocked, flow freely, or vary in frequency. Yeah, unfortunately, the next one does. Cleveland Clinic. I did my residency at University Hospitals of Cleveland, and we were kind of rivals with the Cleveland Clinic, so I don't mind too much beating on the Cleveland Clinic over this. But the Cleveland Clinic is really bad as far as this sort of stuff goes. So this is their website, the Integrative Medicine site, Cleveland Clinic Wellness Institute. And so what does it say? It says Reiki is a form of hands-on natural healing using the universal life force energy. The term comes from Rei, which transverts into universal, and Ki, which means vital life force energy that flows through all living things. This gentle energy is limitless in abundance and is believed to be a spiritual form of energy. This is on an academic medical center website. The Reiki practitioner is the conduit between you and the source of the universal life force energy. The energy to flow freely through her energy field and through her hands on you. The energy does not come from the practitioner. It comes through the practitioner from the universal source. There is no energy drain on the person giving the treatment. Imagine my relief that this is not the alien healing machine from Babylon 5, Reiki does not work apparently like the alien healing machine from Babylon 5. Does anyone know what the alien healing machine from Babylon 5 was? You're killing me. It was a machine in an early episode of the show that they discovered, which could actually heal people. But it healed people by taking life energy from the practitioner and putting it into the recipient. All right, I guess I'll have to lose that joke in the next time I give this talk. Oh, according to the CCF website, Reiki may, I suppose it may, bring a peaceful, deep relaxation, dissolve energy blockages, tension, detoxify. I don't know how, but I guess, supply universal life force energy to the body, stimulate the body's immune system. Everything stimulates the body's immune system, right? Stimulate bone healing, stimulate healing after surgery. Oh, I love this one. Increase the vibrational frequency of the client on physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual levels. Wow. Wow, indeed.
Sounds good. Who can argue?
So, now the therapeutic touch is basically Reiki. It's a form of Reiki, except that, they don't touch. The idea is the same. It's very much the same. And I like to say it's so nonsensical that even an 11-year-old girl can demolish it. This is the famous JAMA study from Emily Rosa when she was 11 years old, where she basically showed that 21 experienced therapeutic touch practitioners were unable to detect the investigator's energy field. Their failure to substantiate therapeutic touch's most fundamental claim is unrefuted evidence that the claims of therapeutic touch are groundless and that further professional use is unjustified. Can't argue with that. But what does Cochrane say about therapeutic touch? Touch therapies may have a modest effect on pain relief. More studies on healing touch, which is another name for therapeutic touch, and Reiki and relieving pain are needed. You can find more of this too. And then I can't, being a translational researcher, I can't resist a little another animal experiment.
Oh, God.
I'm not even going to talk about it. It's just too ridiculous. Now, and a lot of this you'll notice is based on, Eastern mysticism, Eastern religious beliefs, from Asia and that sort of thing. And I always have to ask one thing about it. Where's the love for ancient Western medicine here? You have, in Chinese medicine, you have the 5-element theory. You have wood, fire, earth, water, metal. We have the 4 humors, right? That's pretty close. You know what I say about this? I say, teach the controversy. Darn it. What worries me, though, is that they might actually do that. And it's gotten so bad that they've really gotten pretty gullible here. You ever hear of the butt reflexology hoax? Ah, yes. Dr. John McLaughlin reported a prank in the British Medical Journal a couple of years back. There was an international conference on integrative medicine in October 2010 in Jerusalem. He basically came up with an idea of, using, he came up with butt reflexology, basically, where he listed the various homunculi, and he put them along the buttoccial region, so to speak. His abstract was accepted. So how does this all happen? I mean, there's a term that I like to call, or I don't like to call it, but other people, when I learned it, I latched onto it again. Methodolatry. Now, one definition is a worship of a method that employs it uncritically, regardless of ever-changing particulars, and steadfastly ignores previous negative results. I like this definition better. The profane worship of the randomized clinical trial is the only valid method of investigation. Okay. Sounds like heresy for me to say that, right? I'm supposed to be science-based medicine. I'm supposed to be for science, reason, and all that. But there's a problem in EBM. There's something missing. Does anyone notice the order? So up at the top, we have systematic reviews and meta-analyses. Randomized controlled double-blind studies, which seems reasonable, right? Cohort studies a little less rigorous. Case control, case series, case reports. Ideas, editorials, opinions. Animal research. Basic research falls under ideas, editorials, and opinions. Okay. basic science is relegated to the lowest rung. Okay, that is the problem. Evidence against from basic science showing that something is highly improbable or impossible doesn't count, or it counts for very, very little in evidence-based medicine. Now, in the context and paradigm of evidence-based medicine, this sort of makes sense. Okay, here's the idea. You have you either have a clinical observation, you have basic science and biochemistry that progresses to more advanced science in cell culture, and then you go into animal models, and then you do clinical trials, and these could cross-fertilize, but this is the basic idea. There's a blind spot in EBM, though. So EBM, like I said, EBM clinical trial evidence uber alles, okay? And it relegates basic science to the lowest level. This is the blind spot that allows quackery into academic medicine, and I'll try to show you why as we get to this next part of the talk. For one thing, not everything needs testing. Okay? You can tell, for instance, just from physics, that homeopathy can't work. Physics, chemistry, etc. And in fact, for homeopathy, something like homeopathy to work, lots and lots of basic science laws have to be wrong, and not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. One of my favorite little sayings that I repeat ad nauseum. I'll give you kind of an example. About 10 years ago, there was this awesome article in the BMJ. Parachute used to prevent death and major trauma related to gravitational challenge. A systematic review of randomized controlled trials. Okay. I'm just going to sit here and let you read the conclusion because it's awesome. There you have it. I particularly love the last sentence. Okay. So EBM was blindsided by CAM. There's an assumption, an implicit assumption, that any hypothesis that reaches the stage of RCTs must have decent preclinical evidence to support it. That's like the inherent assumption behind an EBM. So, and I'm not saying that basic science can prove that something works. What I'm saying is, it's insufficient, but that doesn't mean it's unnecessary. And it can't conclude that while it can't conclude that a treatment is efficacious, it can conclude that the probability of a treatment working is so low that it's not worth testing. We can conclude this from basic science in many, many cases. And the other thing that blindsided EBM is that a lot of modalities have been rebranded as CAM, or integrative medicine. Herbal medicine is nothing more than natural products pharmacology. Interactions between herbal medicines and pharmaceuticals, exercise, nutrition, rational diets. There's nothing alternative about any of these things, but somehow they're considered CAM. And that's why I like to call these things kind of the Trojan Horse. So, you all know the Trojan Horse. So that diet, exercise, nutrition, whatever you want to call all this stuff that should be science-based medicine is basically like a Trojan horse, and it gets pulled into the halls of academia. Sadly, my alma mater is one of them. And out jumps all the real woo, like homeopathy and stuff like that, on the basis that, well, nutrition is good, it works. Exercise is good, it helps. Homeopathy is good too, right? It's the foot in the door. So that's why science-based medicine. And took me a while to come into this concept whole, enthusiastically. We had actually some fairly epic discussions before we launched the science-based medicine blog, in which it was kind of everyone against me. But they finally brought me around. It's a great idea in theory. See, what I was arguing was really science-based medicine, except that I was assuming that evidence-based medicine was science-based medicine. In any case, it's highly flawed, but when used properly, science-based medicine could potentially correct the blind spot. Part of the problem is the concept that posterior probability, in other words, depends on prior probability. So in other words, everyone knows the p-value, 0.05 means, roughly a 5% chance. It means a 5% chance that you could get the same result, by chance alone. Now, if you use Bayesian statistics, and I'm not an expert at this, but I still show this slide at risk of being made to look stupid sometimes. If the prior probability is low, a quote-unquote significant result is less likely to be truly significant. So let's take p.01, which p05 is barely significant, so people tend not to. So like at the prior probability based on, if you have a good estimate that the prior probability that something will work is 1%, a p-value of 0.1 only means that it's 13% likely that that's a true result. Even here, it's only 50%, even at what's considered a highly significant p-value, 0.001. What's the odd? What's the prior probability of homeopathy? About as close to 0 as you can imagine. I never say it's 0 because I like to try to keep the open mind, at least, but which I'll get to in a minute. 10 to the minus 43. Do I hear 10 to the minus 44? No, okay.
Okay. I'll grant you that.
And the other thing that that CAM advocates will often try to convince you of is that, well, you just mean you're dismissing stuff because you don't know the mechanism. This stuff works, we just don't know how. No. We can't reject something out of hand just because we don't understand how it could work, okay? And that's not what we're saying. But we can reject a treatment if its proposed mechanism violates scientific principles that rest on far more solid evidence than bias and error-prone clinical trials. Energy medicine, okay? Claims based on non-existent anatomic structures like reflexology, iridology, acupuncture. Non-existent physiological functions like craniosacral rhythms, or claims violating multiple laws of physics. Homeopathy, okay? You can see there is no mechanism for homeopathy that does not involve trashing various laws of physics. There just isn't. So you need at least enough evidence to overturn those laws of physics to convince me that homeopathy works, not like a couple of clinical trials that purport to show an effect slightly above that of placebo. So, fortunately, Cochrane might just be starting to get it. There was actually a couple articles not too long ago. If there are no randomized clinical trials, do we always need more research? And they actually said, possibly not. Unfortunately, the only example they could give is intercessory prayer. But it's a start, There's also big CAM money going on. Christy Mack and John Mack started the Bravel Consortium, which I guess is actually supposed to fade into something else this year, but be that as it may. They've formed the Consortium of Academic Health Centers for Integrative Medicine. There are 44 members. These are just some of them. Again, my alma mater. Hang my head in shame. University of Arizona. My former employer. Harvard, Yale. Poor Steve Novella. He's butted heads on this sort of stuff. There's also CAM in medical schools. There are at least 100 courses being offered in medical schools on CAM, which would be okay. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against teaching CAM in medical schools if it's taught from a science-based perspective. The problem is, this is taught from the blind spot of the evidence-based perspective, in which, and sometimes from a purely credulous standpoint. Like I said, 40 medical schools in the consortium. And it's not just electives. And there are integrative medicine programs. And it's a required part of the curriculum in some medical and nursing schools. It's actually in the requirements. So let's look at one. University of Maryland. Sorry. I'm sorry. I know where I am. But I'm as sorry as I am to say it, University of Maryland is one of the leaders in quackademic medicine. They have Reiki masters at Maryland Shock Trauma. There's 16 hours of CAM in their curriculum, a 1-month elective. In the first and second years, they have these student-driven small group learning discussions with case discussions and a 6-page integrative case that unfolds over 4 courses. CAM topics are woven into disease-specific initiatives. Third year, lectures in integration of CAM and the family medicine clerkship. And a 4th-year CAM elective. I also note that Georgetown is a leader in quackademic medicine, at least in terms of educating medical students. Georgetown, as far as I know, I could be wrong, was the very first medical school to try to, what they call, seamlessly weave CAM into their curriculum right from the first year, including acupuncture points in gross anatomy. And let's look at the clinical services. So, clinical service. This is the web page for University of Maryland. They offer acupuncture, homeopathy, reflexology, reiki, and it's very popular. Look at this. The 4th year, they're touting that it's a top choice for their 4th year medical students to take this elective. Now, is anyone from AMSA here? Oh, too bad. No, in all fairness, I'll tell you what I mean in a minute. But the American Medical Student Association is steeped in this sort of stuff, unfortunately. It's the oldest independent organization for physicians in training, with 68,000 members, including medical students, pre-med students, interns, residents. And it's a major force for integrating quackery into medicine, I'm afraid. For instance, they have a curriculum that they call EdCAM, for Educational Development for CAM. It's a curriculum designed to integrate CAM teaching into medical schools. So I'm going to hone in on just one module here. Okay, this is the energy biomedicine module here. So these are some of the objectives, and I'm just going to march down them real quick. Define the terms biomagnetic medicine, biofield therapies, biofield frequency, electromagnetic field, reiki, therapeutic touch, etc. Explain how energy medicine works according to our present scientific understanding. That would take me 2 words. It doesn't. Okay. Discuss what scientific questions and controversies remain. Discussing the scientific loopholes. Yes. But here's my favorite, I think. Yes, this is my favorite. They're teaching counter-arguments, okay? What we nasty skeptics say about energy medicine. And and how to refute it, okay? Okay, explain present and most promising future applications, key studies, okay. You get the idea, right? What is this? It's magic, yes. Now, in all fairness, the current administration, I've actually talked to the current administration of AMSA, because one of them actually came when I talked at SciCon in October, and they were and they're trying to change this, and I would love to help them any way I can, but it's hard because there are faculty advisors, there is an entrenched infrastructure, including their CAM directory, where they give you a guide to CAM programs that medical students can do electives in. Integrative Medicine Scholars Program, which is an online resource. Basically, it's online learning. It's extra credit, basically. There's the LEAPS program, which basically takes them all out to the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health in the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts to commune with nature and learn woo. But if you're really serious, there's a whole month elective and a humanistic elective in alternative medicine, activism, and reflective transformation. Oh, geez, it's coming up in a couple weeks. There are also integrative residencies now, thanks to our friend here, such as Arizona, Wisconsin, other places. It's an integrative residency. There are new residency sites that were opened a few years ago. There's even now a board certification in integrative medicine. Now, granted, it's not through the normal board, the American Board of Medical Specialties. It's through the American Board of Physician Specialties, which is a lesser organization that a lot of hospitals don't recognize, but it's there nonetheless. I would love to see what the test is. There is NCAM. You can't make it do a talk like this without mentioning NCAM. Fortunately, Tom Harkin is not running for re-election. Unfortunately, he'll be here until January 2015. And, it's basically spent well over $1 billion without validating anything. Then there's CAM versus... Now, there are real consequences to this. Some of this is profoundly unethical, okay? Let's look at the Helsinki Declaration, what it says about human subjects research. It says medical research involving human subjects must conform to generally accepted scientific principles, be based on a thorough knowledge of the literature and other relevant sources of information, and on adequate laboratory and, where appropriate, animal experimentation. Okay? There is no body of basic science or animal experimentation that supports things like the Gonzalez therapy, chelation, homeopathy, or energy medicine. But they're doing clinical trials on it. There's a concept known as clinical equipoise. Okay? For a clinical trial to be ethical, okay, there has to be a genuine uncertainty over which option is better for the patient. You cannot randomize patients to a group where they will receive care that is not as good as the patients in the other group. It's the reason why a randomized clinical trial of an unvaccinated versus a vaccinated population is unethical. Okay? It's the reason why trials like the Gonzalez protocol were unethical. If you remember, I don't know how, the Gonzalez protocol is a treatment for pancreatic cancer that involves tons of pancreatic enzymes, animal glandular products, supplements, coffee enemas, the whole works. Nicholas Gonzalez published a paper in the late 90s that was basically a best case series in which he had some patients with advanced pancreatic cancer who lived longer than you would expect based on historical data. This was enough to get this protocol, with the help of Dan Burton, forced upon NCAM, basically, and forced to be funded by the NIH. And it was a randomized, there were a lot, I could spend like half an hour on this trial. The bottom line is standard of care was over a year median survival. Gonzalez protocol was 4.3 months with a lower quality of life. There are even bigger ones. There's like the TACT trial, the trial to assess chelation therapy. Chelation therapy, there's no evidence that it should work. It's potentially dangerous. And they spent $30 million on this. I think it's still going. I don't think it's closed yet. They closed it for a while, and I think they reopened it. And they reopened it, I think. There are trials like homeopathic remedies for treating acute childhood diarrhea in third world countries. Okay? Homeopathic combination, dengue, for dengue fever symptoms in Honduras, Nicaragua, all these trials of homeopathic remedies on, it's horrible. There's also this issue, CAM breeds hostility to EBM and SBM. For instance, here's a lovely article by Andrew Weil. It's mostly Andrew Weil. I know he's in the middle, and that means he's not like the main author, but you can tell it's him. Where he said almost all. The funny thing is, he's kind of right, but what he wants to do about it is wrong. So he says almost all decision making based on the primacy of large RCTs creates a strong preference for conventional care options, given the primacy of the pharmaceutical funding which drives the vast majority of large RCTs. In fact, overdependence on RCTs has been fostered by the need for conventional pharmaceuticals to meet Food and Drug Administration requirements for marketing. Gradually, the influence of EBM has been misinterpreted to embrace RCTs as the only form of evidence considered to be valid. I actually kind of agree with him on that last thing, but he wants a different, looser standard of evidence for CAM. And he doesn't want to consider scientific prior probability. More hostility. This is my favorite example of hostility towards EBM, okay? This was an awesome paper for pure entertainment value. Anyone seen this paper before? Deconstructing the evidence-based discourse in health sciences. Truth, Power, and Fascism. International Journal of Evidence-Based Healthcare. It's up there in the corner, real small. I mean, does this sound familiar? It sounds a lot. It's right out of the ID playbook here, isn't it? Or the global warming playbook. Oh, it gets better. You have to see the quote. I actually have two quotes because this is so awesome. So, when the pluralism of free speech is extinguished, speech as such is no longer meaningful. What follows is terror, a totalitarian violence. We must resist the totalitarian program, a program that collapses words and things, a program that thwarts all invention, a program that robs us of justice, of our meaningful place in the world, and of the future that is ours to forge together. They're just getting warmed up, though. We assert that the evidence-based movement in health sciences constitutes a good example of microfascism at play in the contemporary scientific arena. I don't know about you, but this is what I think of when I think of microfascism. All right. I'm running a little long, but is everyone okay? I'll be done in a couple minutes here. So part of the problem is shruggies. And Val Jones invented this term, and I applaud her for it. It's a person who doesn't really care about science versus pseudoscience debate. When presented with descriptions of exaggerated or fraudulent claims, they shrug. They're just not that interested. And there are a lot of doctors like that. They know this stuff is nonsense. They'll tell you it's nonsense, but they're not going to fight about it. There's also, be open-minded, right? Don't be closed-minded, but there is a danger, of course, right? You don't want to be so open-minded that your brain falls out. And I like Ed Zardern's quote on open minds, right? Should we keep an open mind about astrology, perpetual motion, alchemy, alien abduction, and the sightings of Elvis Presley? No, and we are happy to confess that our minds have closed down on homeopathy in the same way. I love that quote. But I also like Mark Crislip's quote, which I think sums up integrative medicine beautifully, okay? So I'm just going to let this sink in for a second. I use this one constantly. So, on that note, it's almost exactly an hour. I ran a little bit over, but that's we'll just kind of work our way around the room here.
Do you have any speculations as to how the evidence-based medicine got into the world-class medical academic institutions? And then also, are there any...
On how what got into it?
How evidence-based medicine curriculum...
Oh, you mean EdCamp? I mean it's a recommended curriculum. They don't have to use it.
How did it get into it? And also, are there any academic institutions that have resisted it that you think are the good?
You know, I honestly don't know. Part of the problem is it's now required as part of the medical school curriculum that there be some CAM education. However, the standards are remarkably vague. They don't, you know, so medical schools can teach it in a science-based manner, or they can teach it in a not-so-science-based manner. Yes, I see you've had your hand up a long time.
Yeah, that was sort of my question too. But I was also wondering if there were any like journals too that have maintained a scientific take on.
Oh, I think some of these journals get blindsided by this stuff. I mean, most journals are ostensibly. You don't find a lot of CAM in the top tier journals. You know, occasionally a little bit slips into like the New England Journal and.
You bet. And JAMA.
Well, JAMA's not. I don't consider JAMA top tier anymore.
The best place to read is the blog sciencebasedmedicine.org.
Well, that was on that complimentary note.
SBM.org. I write for them. I comment. Other scientists like myself who are not physicians comment, even when their own writers get a little bit off base. But that's the best place.
Let's see, this side of the room. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Okay, you first.
Is this an international phenomenon? I see you're in London there, but is the United States particularly out of whack?
There's a lot of it in Europe. There's definitely, in fact, Germany in particular.
Not in Sweden. I checked with my Swedish colleagues.
But you know, London. There's a lot of history there. The London Royal Homeopathic Hospital. You know, that's 6. I can't believe that's 6 years ago. But that was, you know, I went there in 2007. And I insisted I had to have my picture taken in front of the London home. My wife was kind of annoyed because I think we took like time to get up there that we could have been doing something else. But
governments around the world spend hundreds of billions of dollars on scientific research each year, and yet there hasn't been one single study of genetically modified foods on humans. I read your website, and you equate GMO denial with vaccine denial, and I wonder, as a skeptic, why you're so quick to make that judgment.
Well, they use a lot of the same sorts of arguments. I mean, and what is it about, you know, I mean, specifically, you're not talking about that rat study from last year, are you?
No, I said that there hasn't been one single study of genetically...
Well, what do you mean by study? I mean, it's been, you know...
All foods are genetically modified.
Exactly. All foods are genetically modified.
We're all genetically modified.
We've been genetically modifying food for thousands of years.
Well, any of these foods that have gotten the intellectual property rights, like...
Now, one thing you could do... Look, what I like to do is try to separate the science from what the companies do with it, okay? Monsanto's intellectual property, you know, stuff, for instance, you know, you could certainly argue that that's you know not a good thing, but that's kind of, you know, that's a different issue though than whether the food itself is safe, which I mean, what's the evidence that it's not? I asked that too. I mean,
You're sure to have Roundup residue.
Pesticide residue used to be banned.
Well, pesticide residue is on all foods, right? So
that changed roughly 100 years ago. The government decided that there would be an allowable limit. So we've had that for a while. Now with the GMOs, potentially there is a much higher level of contamination because the foods grow it themselves and probably they have it sprayed on top.
Well, that's an issue of pesticide, not GMO.
Well, it's connected to the GMOs because...
Yeah, but it's not from the GMO, it's from pesticide.
Could we move on?
Okay, thank you.
Different topic.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
There are other.
Maybe should we form a line or something? I don't know. I don't want to be favoring people. How about, okay, you. Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, how about you? I don't.
Is there a formal definition of evidence-based medicine? And I'm wondering, where did you come up?
That was straight off the Cochrane website. I mean, there are other definitions, but they're all fairly similar.
And the pyramid comes from?
Oh, I forget what website I got that from. But it's if you look at the pyramid, sometimes, they're all very similar. How about you in the back there?
You included Dean Ornish with Dr. Weil and the others. It was my understanding that Ornish did scientific tests.
Yeah, but well, it depends. Which ones are you referring to? Because he's kind of a mixed bag.
Reversing heart disease.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's that. It's suggestive. I'm not. Look, this is a perfect example, though, of rebranding of dietary therapy as being somehow canned, isn't it? At least I think it is. I will say I'm not convinced by his prostate cancer stuff, because I looked at those papers and the way the way they sampled the prostate specimens was fraught with problems. But I have nothing against diet as treatment for heart disease and stuff like that. What I have a problem with is kind of the layering of pseudoscience on top of it and the co-opting of it by people who are basically there to promote pseudoscience.
Have you delved into psychiatry, psychoanalysis, psychotherapy?
It's not my area of expertise. I know.
You haven't gone into it.
Well, not much. I mean, what you have anything specific in mind?
Well, you can make up a diagnosis out of whole cloth and then study it scientifically. You can very scientifically study how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Except if there are no angels, that's the nature of what goes on today.
Yeah, but there are diseases. We're talking about diseases that we can see in the clinic.
I mean,
give me an example of what you're talking about.
There are hundreds of diseases. I mean, we're not talking about angels dancing on
No, I'm
pins.
talking
We're
about
talking about
psychiatry.
diabetes.
All right, PTSD. I think everyone in this audience probably believes there's such a thing.
I mean, yeah, there are certain areas that are much harder to study than others.
Understandable.
Okay, we'll work our way this way. I'm sorry. You.
Yeah, there's a key word I haven't heard mentioned, and it ties in a little bit with what the previous gentleman said. I'll preface this by saying that I am an internist, and I deal with these issues on a daily basis. The key word, I think, is placebo.
Yes.
All of these alternative treatments can work for some patient some of the time, because placebos work.
We could argue about that, actually. I didn't actually include... you're making me regret that I cut some of my placebo stuff out of my talk.
The criteria of the FDA is not whether or not a treatment works. It's whether it works better than a placebo.
Yes, but what is placebo? See, we could argue about that all day. And have, actually. But.
All I can say is that there are patients who, and I don't refer them for reiki therapy or acupuncture or anything like that, but there are patients who get some type of benefit from that.
That actually gets
from those treatments.
That actually gets a little bit into ethics.
They feel a benefit from it. So I mean, it's something that we have to face and address, and I think it's why it's so hard to fight against some of these things is because there are always going to be testimonials of people who say, "This helped me."
True. I can't. Yeah, I'm not. Okay. Well.
So you list a lot of prestigious institutions in this on your website and things like that. in the unfortunate circumstance in which, say, I do get cancer and I am a supporter, proponent of science-based medicine, what are your recommendations for not dealing or avoiding?
Let me
like
preface it by saying one thing. I would not hesitate if I had cancer to go to MD Anderson or Memorial Sloan Kettering. Okay, this stuff is kind of right now off to the side, and you don't actually have to take it. But my worry is in the future, it's a pernicious influence. Gage? Yes, sir.
Well, I'm just glad you stopped on that, because I am a cancer patient, and I take an anti-angiogenic drug. It's your area of expertise. And I wanted to bring up another loophole that you should probably look at. It has to do with this issue of nutrition. Because I think there's a reason why it's been marginalized off to the integrative area and not accepted, and it's a problem. And I specifically went up to Memorial Sloan Kettering to talk to the top guy who did the clinical trials on the drug that I take, because I wanted to discuss the implications of my diet and nutrition. And I got what I think is a pretty typical answer, which was, I don't talk about diet because I wasn't trained in this when I went to medical school. And I won't talk about supplements because I'm afraid that they'll interfere with the metabolism of the drug you take. Well, I've done a lot of research on all that and everything else. And I mean, it was a fair thing, but what the point I wanted to make was, as I was walking out and leaving, they said, oh, by the way, we have an integrative arm here at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Would you like it? And I said, well, that's interesting. And then they said, well, it's across town. But my whole point here is that the nutrition is sort of the one area, and you've always sort of put that in a little fuzzy place that shouldn't be lumped together. And yet I think mainstream medicine is lumping it over there.
Well, no, I'm not saying it's strictly. It's not strictly. Your point's valid. It's not strictly the fault of integrative medicine proponents. That's the case.
I think it's important because even around the news, you got Robert Lustig talking about sugar and carbs and all.
Well, the whole sugar feeds cancer thing.
Open up a can of worms. I'm just trying to make an illustration. It's a very important topic, and if it's given to these guys, it's to me a tremendous disservice. There should be good science and stuff that's given to the public, and if it's not, they're going to go off and be marginalized off to these guys.
Yeah, you have a point. I can't argue too much with it. All right, you and then you. No, well, you first and then.
Let's just pick one example and see why the whole system can't deal with it. The 11-year-old girl's study was brilliant, and there have been a number of things also similar to that. For example, in the facilitated communication area.
Okay.
With a very simple test, what they said is, here's a certified, trained practitioner who isn't actually doing what they claim they're doing. They may not even be aware that they're not doing it. They may think they're doing it. But you can prove with a simple experiment they're not actually doing it. What I want to know is how come that can't get translated into, if the medical profession gave a damn, they should be able to grab a hold of something like that and say, not only is the mechanism not understood, the mechanism is disproven. There's no mechanism, because until you can overcome this study, you can show that there's no mechanism. And yet, the stuff is all over the schools.
It's a cultural need to believe this stuff.
That's not the only example. There's lots of examples of the sorts of things.
Oh, no, I'm just saying, just take that one for a minute and say, why can't someone get a hold of it?
Well, no, I've never been able to understand how facilitated community, because it's so obvious, what it is, to anyone with a little bit of skepticism.
It is diminished, but it's still alive. But it's, it was pretty well disproved, and I think a lot of people did drop it. But it's the same kind of stuff. Whereas you think the trained people, a lot of them think they're actually doing something, and then you can do a simple experiment to show them that they're not. But there's more bioenergy stuff And more of this stuff all the time.
Well, I mean, you could say homeopathy. You can't detect anything. You know, you can't tell the difference between a homeopathic remedy and water or whatever the diluent was. But you know,
Good, we'll get you in. They have a slick claim, which is the memory of water.
contagious magic. I forgot to mention that. I forgot it. That's contagious magic.
Yeah, well, they don't say it's magic. They say it's vibrations and it's
magic. Magical vibrations.
Going off vaccine denial that was mentioned earlier, you said back in 2005 that if the autism rates went down before the year 2015, that you would admit that there at least would be some pretty good epidemiological evidence that there might be a connection between aerosol and autism. Now that that's happened in one of the reported states reported by CDC in 2012, will you
has it happened in the rest of the country? Has it happened in the rest of the country?
Has it happened? The rest of the country, only a certain selection of states are even being continuously monitored by the CDC. Some states get removed from the system, others get added in. Alabama, where this decrease has happened.
Did it happen in California?
Has been going down consistently. California they stopped monitoring California before they could ever determine whether or not there was a correlation. The CDC stopped monitoring California, but they continued to monitor Alabama, and that has gone down by 20%.
The answer, there's what are autism prevalence doing? What is autism prevalence doing in, for instance, New Jersey?
They removed that. They took it out. They took out the 2006 reporting year, so we only have 2008. We have a gap in that prevalence data.
What is the average age of diagnosis of autism and ASD?
It depends on the autism spectrum disorder. With Asperger's syndrome, it's more like 7 or 8. With classic autism, earlier, about a decade ago, it was more like 4.5 years. Now it's dropped.
How about 3 years? That's a good number, right? When did they take thimerosal out of vaccines?
Well, according to the Council on State Governments, it's been out since, it's been slowly phased out, and apparently it hasn't been, they claim it hasn't been in since early 2004.
It's more like, depends. When did they take it out?
There are multiple years, I guess. Not 2002.
2001. Okay. What was 3 years after 2001?
2004.
What was 6 years after 2001?
We're skeptical about the math.
The answer is no. The epidemiology does not support. You have one state, it's not clear what happened. Everywhere else, the rates are still going up or stable.
CDC doesn't track everywhere else.
Do you have one more question waiting?
Last question.
Next question.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick about the thing about psychology. Like, there's plenty of issues in psychiatry and psychology. There's plenty of issues. There's plenty of things to be discussed and brought up at the DSM and everything. There's some issues that I have questions about, but there's really no question about whether PTSD is real with, rape victims and people who've gone through war and soldiers, and especially with the amount that doctors had to fight to even get PTSD to become a diagnosis, because the government didn't want it to be one, because they would actually have to pay for treatment, since it was generally soldiers who were getting it treated. It is not a question whether PTSD is real.
I'll talk to you afterwards.
I don't know enough to get into this particular one, so I'm not going to try.
All right, I think that's enough. We're going to have our refreshments now.